Bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum bum
Oh,
bum
mate,
bum bum.
Man,
Man, man, man, man,
man.
bum 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 bum.
Go on, let's join in. Man, bum, bum, bum. Bash Bros. It's time.
Ready? He's doing it already. I can't go with it. I can't. I just lose character. Like.
Come on, mate.
Right. Welcome back to another episode of Bash Bros, episode 62 with Calum. I'm going to probably say this quite wrong because I can't pronounce your last name, mate. So
try it.
I'm just going to go with. It's a race trick.
There you go. Nailed it.
Nice.
Race trick.
Race trick.
It's trick. There's no there's no T on the trick.
Oh, okay.
Right.
The T is silent.
T silent.
Yeah. So if you haven't already, head over to his Instagram page. Johnny's not following him.
Oh, he's taken over this bit. This is good. This is synchronization.
This is our Bash Bros page. We don't follow anyone on our Bash Bros page.
Oh man, we should follow him.
I follow him on my personal page.
Oh,
I think we should probably follow our guests as polite.
Yeah, I think.
I follow every guest.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. That guy. Who's that guy? I've messaged Calum about this guy. Scroll down.
Yeah, go on.
Scroll down. The one below Nathan. Obviously, Nathan's a fucking unit as well.
Right.
This motherfucker.
He's 24.
I know, it's fucking literally disgraceful.
Man.
Look at the thickness on that fucker.
It's nuts.
Yeah, he's not. I'm hoping that he's 3 foot tall. Is he 3 foot tall?
He's not super tall. He's not super tall. I think he's like maybe 5'10".
So he's not even like that small, really. Yeah, he's going to be fucking nuts.
Yeah.
Seeing him training as well, like he's a genuine freak in the gym as well. Like some of the
Yeah,
stuff.
he's got long strength, funny. Just picks
Nuts.
stuff up.
we won't get him on the podcast. We made that mistake last time with Mong Strength.
Yeah, so usual thing anyway, head over, give Calum a follow. So do us a favor, bud, usual thing, rundown on what got you into the sport, you know, a bit of your personal history, what got you into coaching before we start probing on your methods and all that good stuff.
Yeah. I guess I've come from like a sporting background just from a young age. Like both my dad and my brother played a lot of rugby at a good level. I was the only shit one at rugby, so both of them played internationally, and I was pretty shit. But like dad coached, and he was also like he taught in schools as well. So like that coaching, like teaching kind of thing has been in my life pretty much all my life as well. Usual stuff. Went to uni. Thought I was going to be a rugby player, went to Hartbury College, turned out I was pretty shit at rugby when I played against good people, so stopped playing rugby. And then I think the training side of things, where I used to kind of train for more so like performance benefits and just being better at that sport, it kind of turned into training because I love to train. And then it's just kind of like one thing led to another, and it materialized into, you know, finding a passion for what we do for bodybuilding. And then I think the kind of coaching, teaching kind of thing that's been kind of ingrained into me from a young age was always there. And it kind of led down the path of I started PTing, started coaching on the gym floor, did that for 6-7 years. I don't know if you're familiar with M10 in Nottingham, but Mark Coles' place, I was at M10 for about 3 years. And that's where like Josh Maley was there. And, you know, I was around those kind of guys back then. And that kind of got me into looking at the competitive side of things. And then, like Ryan said a minute ago, it's kind of been like the caliber of client and the type of person that I've worked with has kind of evolved over the last 3 or 4 years, really, from kind of like getting a few clients doing, you know, PCA shows and getting a few clients at a regional level to now kind of growing onto a bigger scale, which is really, really cool. So that's been that, you know, nurtured from probably 2014 when I first started PTing to now.
That was it.
And that was it. Yeah, that was it.
Completed it.
Yeah. So at the moment it's like I said, it's just probably the last when did I start coaching you? Right, it must have been about a year ago now.
Yeah, about a year ago now. Yeah.
Yeah, probably around that time, about a year ago, where I started to, like, as soon as you start coaching, say you get 1 or 2 pros on your books, and then the word gets around and you can start making content about them and coaching them, and they tag you in whatever, like, you start to communicate to a slightly different audience, and that's kind of nurtured over the last 12 months into what it is now. So
it was all down to Ryan.
It was all down to Ryan. Yeah.
I don't want to say it, but it's kind of what I do. No.
So yeah, like, I
So
guess,
for you, it was like a natural progression. You hadn't set out. You hadn't gone on a course about how to earn 10K in a month.
No, I literally I've done no business mentoring or courses at all. It's just I've focused on being really good at coaching.
Imagine that.
That's all I've done.
You thought if you got really good, then people would come because you were good. Yeah. You didn't need to go on to a course about how to con people into working with you. It's madness.
Yeah, I get that question quite a lot as well from people, where it's like, who have you been mentored by? Who have you learned off? And
this is fucking, like, do you remember those, like, How to Be a Millionaire people that would, like, I think there was like a Louis Theroux on it, and it was like none of the people that followed him had actually, the only millionaire was him, because he'd sold everyone the idea of being a millionaire. I love those guys.
Yeah, I think it's like,
from a client perspective, just obviously for yourself, it's people don't see how much work really goes into how many check-ins you do on a daily basis, how you live on your laptop. Like, that's what basically breeds, like, I'll text you and you'll literally get back to me within maybe an hour max if you do it. Like, even at the Arnold's, you was there literally 24/7. So I think people have skipped that part of where you have to be. We were saying last time, it's energy, isn't it? You can't be a massive, like, a great bodybuilder and a great coach at the same time at your level, and you've just gone all in on coaching, haven't you?
Yeah.
And then literally just churned out the results because you genuinely care. That's what it is.
He's a shit bodybuilder.
Hey.
Mate, I won a PCA first time show. What are you talking
about? Genuinely, as a coach, like, I would say, if you go all in on something, you're going to be better at it, aren't you?
So how do you, like, because obviously you've got a huge client base now, and what is interesting, you've not had it from a business perspective, but obviously your ability to manage your time, and also to refresh yourself and leave yourself downtime so that you can be a great coach. How do you manage that? Have you got systems in place for your own kind of sanity? On flights, if you get on a flight, they say you must apply your own mask before helping others, and I think that does kind of ring true. How do you look after you so that you are then able to give the best version of yourself to others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like, Ryan's 100% right in regards to, like, the last, probably ever since I left M10 and we moved over to Manchester first, like, that was where I kind of went all in on the coaching side. And that's, like, it's a pretty relentless thing. Like, this will be what I do, 7 days a week, pretty much all day. And it's all I think about. So there's not as much, like, balance per se, but also on the flip side, it's something I actually love, and it's something I'm really passionate about. So although it's tiring and it's a lot of effort and a lot of stress, because I love it as well, it doesn't seem like, from the outside perspective in, if that was like a normal job that you didn't love, it would be like, oh my God, this is too much. But because it's something you're passionate about, it doesn't really feel like a burden, if that makes sense. So
you can self-charge on that
to an extent. Yeah, like I've just been down and trained with Mark for 2 hours, and that's kind of like my get out away from my computer, and then I'm fresh and I can go back to it. Like, it's not a thing where I have to take time off because I'm sick of it, because it's, I'm motivated to be successful and help people and continue churning out results and continue, turning people pro, or continue, making pros do better things. And that's really self-motivating for me. So the balance side of things is, yeah, of course I have balance. Like, I'll try and finish work at a specific time. I'll try and, sit with the missus at night and watch some TV and, chill out and, walk the dogs or whatever it might be. But for the most part, it's, my life really just revolves around this at the moment. And like I've always said, like, to Hannah, like, because if you ask Hannah, my fiance, she'll be like, yeah, he fucking never stops working. But my kind of mindset on there is like, make bread whilst the oven's hot, so to speak. Like when you've got the opportunity, you need to grab it and take it. And that's kind of been my mindset for the last couple of years. And I think like that probably this year more than anything is starting to kind of come to fruition now in terms of like seeing that with results, tangible things, because you know there's been a lot of success this year with the guys and girls that have competed, and I think that's a product of the effort that I've put in and the time that I've put in over the last couple of years.
Good.
To answer the question, there's no balance.
There's no balance. Fuck your balances.
Okay, so I don't know if anyone else wants to ask questions before I dive into any on the page.
Let's go in the page. I got sent a couple, so I'll check those in.
There's a 10 on you. We're not going to get through them all. So I'll just start at the top. So Conor Roycroft, what makes a good client? And are people overusing bands/cuffs?
What makes a good client? I think like the client relationship and client success is ultimately going to come down to the connection and rapport you can build with that individual. Because I think like the people that go the furthest are the people that have the most trust and the ability to communicate with said coach. So like the skill element and their ability to listen and, you know, their ability to adhere, and the coach's skill and the coach's experience is important. But I think if you don't have that bond and that connection, there will be a breakdown to a certain extent. So I think, and I'm sure like I'd like to see Ryan's opinion on this as well, being a client himself. But like, I think that rapport and connection you can build and that relationship you can nurture is really, really important.
Yeah, you definitely find it like, if you feel like you're in the experience together, if you're in, like I said to you last time, if you're invested in my goals, which you clearly are, because you just bend over backwards in the sense of whatever I need, or like if I need to come to yours and you like drive down to mine, we'll check over you, stay at mine, all these things, they add up and they build trust, like you say. It makes it easier as a client, definitely. Would you find, is it now you're training like, say you're training Mark, who's a top level genetic freak, or coaching just someone who's starting out, what do you find easier? Is it easier to coach Mark, or is it easier to coach someone just starting out?
I think the main difference is when somebody's already had a certain level of success, there is a little bit of a transitionary period coaching someone where you have to make them buy in a little bit harder because they've already had success doing what they were doing previously. Does that make sense? Like if it's somebody completely new or it's a first-time competitor, they don't really have any expectations and don't really have any opinions on what they're doing. They just follow and execute. Whereas if it's someone who's, you know, already turned pro or already won a pro show, whatever it might be, what they've been doing is obviously going to be something that sticks with them and they might be a little bit more resistant to change. But then I think from a coaching standpoint, there's a skill in that where, you know, and I think this is something we've talked about, Ryan, where there needs to be a certain degree of me talking, but also me listening. And like stuff that's worked in the past, there's a reason why it's worked and you can't disregard that and discredit it. So like I can't be too dogmatic in the way I'm coaching. I also need to listen to the athlete because they've already got a certain level of success doing what they've done and there's something to learn from that.
I think from my point of view was like, the difference was that you're saying in there was when I'd say to you, Cal, why are we using L-carnitine like pre-cardio injectable? You'd be like, I'll send you a presentation. And then it breaks it down and educates me on why I'm doing it. I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Whereas sometimes I think even myself, because I'm not that good of an educator, I just like, just because it fucking works. But I think as a pro or as a like a person who's been competing 10 years, having that research and the studies behind it and the actual knowledge, in-depth knowledge on it, it kind of makes you think, oh, okay, maybe we'll give it a go. Do you know what I mean? Like rather than just being like, no, it don't fucking work. So yeah, I think that helps massively.
I mean, so the type of client that you get can be coachable in different ways. Some people actually do just want to be a robot.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I'm not interested. I just want you to make it work, and we'll see. But like you said, if you have that catch up and that talk and take heed of the client's previous success, then you miss out that kind of guess period in the middle. You make a calculated decision on a starting point, whereas someone who's fresh, like you said, might get newbie gains anyway, but actually you're going to have to pitch, you know, a guess really, because everyone's body is different. You know, that's the main thing to take, and it's going to take you some time to learn that. So if you've got the information like on hand, then why not use it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
I think the things that I've done differently with yourself, that I've done way different is, and it's a new model that everybody's kind of putting out there, is if you could explain it, Cal, because it'd be good for the listeners, like the lower testosterone, higher primo, like even the training off season, that's all like unheard of. Like even to myself, before I worked with you, I was like, are you joking? Like 300 mega test. No one believes me that I'm on 300 mega test. I think it's a gram, but it's probably the size of my head. But but the primo and the trend and so on, it's quite interesting when you actually explain. I be honest, I can't explain it as well as you do, so I can't tell people this is why we're doing it. But you know a lot more than I do on that front, and it's a total reverse sort of model, isn't it, compared to what people have been doing for the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think like the important thing with that is when you look at enhanced bodybuilders, like you can't deny the fact that more gear is going to lead to a greater response. But then when we're looking at taking an athlete, and I want to coach someone for not like a short period of time. If I'm going to coach someone, I want to coach them for a long period of time. And one thing that needs to be in the back of your mind in terms of decision making needs to be there needs to be an element of longevity. Even if you've got someone trying to push for the Olympia, like once you get to the Olympia, how long are you going to be able to stay there and maintain what you're doing? So when it comes to that kind of low risk model, if I sent a client, or if I like advised a protocol or something, there might be, multiple things on paper, but at a slightly lower dose. And you're basically using the premise of working through what a big word, multiple pathways of different compounds that lead to the same response as you would have got on, say, using 750 test and a little bit of primo. You could use 4 or 5 or 6 different things at a lower response, but the total load of stress that's going to deliver on your physiology is much less than if we use so say, for example, testosterone is a very highly androgenic drug. So the androgenicity of the stack is going to equate to slightly higher risk as well. Okay. When you look at something like primo, it holds a lower level of androgenicity and a higher level of anabolism. So something like primobolan is going to be highly tolerable relative to testosterone at the same milligram per week. So we're basically designing what, your stack or your protocol or whatever you want to call it. You're trying to design this in a way that leads to the response you want to get to. And don't get me wrong, like if you've got Ryan next to, a super heavy bodybuilder who's like 130 kilos, their milligram per week requirements are going to be much higher than a 90 kilo, 100 kilo classic bodybuilder. So it's all relative. But the idea is we are trying to have the thought process of, do we need to throw the kitchen sink at it, or can we be a little bit more calculated in terms of what we're doing? Because I've had people that have won, multiple people that have won British titles this year, multiple people that have turned pro, right? And all these guys are doing very similar things in terms of using this kind of lowest effective dosing protocol, and they'll use as much as they need. And don't get me wrong, like if I need to push the doses up a little bit relative to them, I will. But the thought process is like, let's not listen to what your mate's told you to do because this has worked for him. Let's try and figure out how we can do this with the highest level of longevity in mind while still achieving the goal.
Yeah, I mean, we had Dr. Dean on, didn't we? And he was talking about like the toxicity and therapeutic like ratio.
Yeah.
And I find that everyone has a different ratio. And there is a point where you can tip the other way, and actually the strain on the system becomes so great that it makes you worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally have a pretty low tolerance to everything, and it's not that not that I take drugs, but if I did, if I was to smash loads and loads, more is more and up to a point, and then it's worse. But so, people are along the kind of like the more is more. That's true to a certain extent. But once you've kind of pushed your envelope, and everyone seems to be different. I've read some incredible cycles, and I was just thinking, well, I would just not be able to train.
Yeah. Or sleep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, don't do that. Sleeping's for idiots.
Oh, Dan mentioned it again.
I was trying not to.
Next question is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek. Pete Wynyard, is Carl punching with his missus? we'll move on from that one because obviously he doesn't think so.
The only person who isn't punching with their missus is Johnny because he hasn't got one.
And he's the only man who's fucking got it right.
Think how rich he is. That's why he's got a cinema in his house.
Yeah, he's doing it right.
Casting couch, he's got a cinema.
Callum has to live in this wooden shack in the garden by the looks of it. He's not allowed to move outside.
Logically built as a percentage, how much more classic does a mustache make your physique?
Well, it makes me 0% classic, so I don't know.
I don't know. I reckon it's something there.
It is funny going to a Two Bros regional and then looking backstage, and you can basically pinpoint the guys that are doing classic because they're all got
And they're all shit.
Right, you got to get a mullet now, mate.
Eh?
You got to get the mullet now, new.
Yeah.
But this is the thing with people with classic. They just, I don't know, just trying to be classic, aren't they?
Mm.
Fucking
Trying to
hell.
be Chris, mate. That's all they're trying
Yeah,
to do.
fucking
Trying
hell.
to sin look.
I just want his bank balance, not his fucking physique.
Right. So Mopsy, he's added 7 questions. So I start at the top. So how has your training style programming evolved over the years?
I would probably say I
I
am.
literally just want a mustache just to do that when someone asks me.
Yeah, that was good actually. That was good actually.
Yes, well, actually, guys. No, go on. It's like,
I think when you start working with like for example, like when you start working with bodybuilders or whatever class they are, when you're first starting out, I can probably say I was a little bit more set in my ways in terms of how I program. So I program in this way. These are the kind of principles that I use, and I tried to apply that to everyone. Whereas now I think I'm a little bit more open-minded in regards to how I approach it, and there's like specific things that I'll do and I need to ensure that are in a client's programming. So like I need to have some form of model of progression, and that could be like progressive overload with low volume, that might be progressive overload with more volume over a training cycle. So I think the biggest thing for me is like not having, I think the more I've coached and the more bodies I've kind of seen through different phases, the more open-minded I am about how I achieve it, if that makes sense. It's not always like I don't do this is push-pull legs and I do that with everyone. It's probably over the last couple, 3 or 4 years as I've learned more, it's got a little bit more varied in terms of like there's not one approach here. I base it on the individual. It's quite a shit answer, but I think like being more open-minded in terms of how I programmed and not kind of falling into a camp, if that makes sense.
But it's true. It's true, not even from a physiological perspective. Some people need to a lot of people need to have their mentality aligned with the training as well. Like if you're doing super low volume, you need to have furious like intensity. You need to be a madman, and if you can't do that, then having the negative correlation of intensity to volume, you're going to need to do some more to kind of take up the slack. So even though you look at a physique and you have an idea, I think this might work and stuff, the mindset might be different, especially if they've come from a completely different training like system, and you might need to ease them in. The other thing is enjoyment, isn't it? You need to enjoy a bit of it, right?
I think longevity is underpinned by enjoyment. And I also think like there's a massive correlation, especially even more at the elite level as well. Like the guys and the girls that are like genuinely enjoying what they're doing are probably going to make the most progress as well, even though you might be able to pinpoint, or this isn't technically right, or you could perform this movement better, or the resistance profile of that exercise isn't placed in the right order. Like at the end of the day, like if they're going to enjoy what they're doing and that's going to reflect in their effort and their work rate, then the chances are they're probably going to progress better as well.
I think what I've found is what's different to me now is I just go in and throw the kitchen sink at it. I'd be doing a rest pause and everything, and literally dead stopping stuff when it was stupidly hard. And now I've learned that we need to phase it. We can't just from week 1 of off season go in and be like, right, every set's going to be a rest pause set, because we just will not last the whole of off season. And like obviously you've had to pull me on that loads of times. Like I'll send you a video like, yeah, don't do that, dickhead. literally like, yeah, don't dead stop that hack squat on the last rep, you bellend. But it again, because it's just so taxing across all the body parts, isn't it? That's what I've found as well.
Do you make So do you make adjustments in training intensity or volume or frequency when people at an advanced or slightly like more advanced level when people are using cycles?
Yeah, so like the way our program is, I'll have like a spectrum of volume across the training phase. Like if I've mapped out like an 8-week block of training, you know, we're going to basically start with what we'd refer to as like minimal effective volumes, like the lower spectrum of volume, and then across, and it could be a 12, it could be a 16-week, but across the training cycle that I've mapped out, the volume will gradually escalate across the period of time. And that could be like me adding sets, or that could be me, you know, adding density within the workout. So we could introduce like rest pause sets, extended sets, whatever that might be me changing the tempo of the exercise. So there's more time under tension. That might be me like relying on their ability to just linearly overload. So if you have something like, if I was programmed for like JP, I know that he's very neurally driven. So he could probably progress a lower level of workload for a longer period of time than maybe someone like Ryan could. Ryan might need those extensions in stimulus, whereas Jordan might just be able to progress something for 8 weeks nonstop on a lower volume approach. So I'd always have like a start and an end to a training block, and then somewhere in the middle you're going to have a period of time where you pull things back. And that might be like pulling back total volume. That might be, you know, using a rep in reserve where you're not taking sets all the way and tanking yourself for 1 week or a couple of sessions. Like you're going to have certain things that you use to pull fatigue down before you push again.
So you use these training blocks within people that aren't using. So do you have, I guess my question was relating to, if you have a block based on them using pads,
yeah,
how would your block look when they're not? You know, would you expect to really see, you know, someone who's been using steroids for a long period of time to actually even be aiming for progression in that time?
Yeah. So like if you've, say if we've got like an athlete in a super physiological state, so like they're pushing gear higher per week, then I know that because protein accretion is going to be high, so like their ability to recover is much better when they're super physiological. I can then get away with being more aggressive with the level of stimulus they're handling. So like if we've got those two sides of the spectrum being like low effective dose, highest effective dose, I'm probably going to spend more time around here when they're on cycle. And then when they're cruising or when they're pulling that milligram per week down, I'm going to gradually just start to scale it back down so it's easier for them to recover. Because if you've got if you've got in an off season and you're pushing whatever it might be, your recovery capacity is much better. Your ability to progress and perform and drive tissue on is going to be much better. When you're physiologically cruising, the ability to actually make tangible progress is much more compromised. So as things slow down in terms of recovery, your workload is going to reflect that as well.
Do you find as well, because you work with super heavyweights and stuff, you've got, and Nathan is obviously like a huge human, the depths of weight gain that people kind of need to touch to kind of, I would say like stabilize, for want of a better word, you know, you do have to push weight and stuff like that. Where would you look for limitations in a weight push in terms of performance? And would you adapt any of your training around that? I find when I'm super heavy, I do need to skim down some of the intensifiers and stuff like that, just because of my inability to actually perform them.
Yeah. It's like, obviously there's like an inverse relationship between work capacity and fitness and scale weight, and it's a very hard balance to crack, which is why like I'll use conditioning work, aerobic conditioning with all those guys year round, just because being a human that big, the first thing that's going to go when you get to those higher thresholds of body weight is that cardiovascular efficiency, and then you're suddenly in a position where anything about 12 reps and you're absolutely tanked. So it starts to cause compromise to actual performance and recovery as well. So I think when you get into that higher spectrum of body weight across the year, keeping some cardiovascular work in is really important. It probably wouldn't be that wise to give them super high volume rep ranges, because they're probably going to gas out quicker than you can actually realistically create something effective. And then little things like, you know, you'll probably know this, Andy, where it's like, if you're getting a lower back pump just walking out of your car to go into the gym, then the chances are you're probably not going to recover that well to direct spinal loading frequently across the week. So if you are exposing them to, you know, challenges in the spine, or like erector loading or a hip hinge or, you know, a hack squat, whatever it might be, that's going to cause compressive forces on the spine, their recovery from that is going to be much worse than somebody like, for example, Ryan, where it's relative to him, but he's probably going to find an easier time carrying his body weight than somebody who's 130, 140 kilos.
Yeah.
So like, we have to be a lot more cautious with how we're loading them, because they're just going to tax much quicker.
And the cumulative fatigue of just existing.
Exactly, yeah.
So what would be like, obviously you have an idea of a cycle length or a push and stuff like that. Would you take cues of when that would end? Obviously you can't stay on cycle forever for various reasons, but is there what would be the markers where you would potentially say that's enough?
So like day-to-day monitoring, so like we've got the ability to regulate and monitor blood pressure, we've got the ability to regulate resting heart rate, we've got the ability to, blood glucose could be a relative tool, but that's more so relative to insulin sensitivity, and we'd be using things to support that. You'd be using like metformin, you'd be potentially using insulin in super high exposure to food, so you could manage that to an extent.
But that would the sensitivity would be potentially down to visceral fat buildup.
Yeah, because the higher the body fat gets, and the more inflamed someone gets, the more compromised that will be.
Yeah.
Blood work is going to be the main thing. So like, I would be in a position where I probably want to test blood work and review blood work before they start that push, at the halfway point of what was proposed, and then towards the end of that higher stress exposure. So Ryan will know this, but like when I design stacks, much like training will kind of follow in a similar pattern, but what we'd refer to as like the amount you're using, or the androgen load, would start at a lower set point and would gradually rise across a period of time. So say if you mapped out a 16-week phase for a bodybuilder, that milligram per week will start down here at the first adjustment, and then it will gradually rise across the course of that 16 weeks. And I know that when we get to, say, hypothetically week 16, that's the highest level of stress exposure that individual will be under. And I know once they get there, their ability to tolerate that won't be for a long space of time. So I'd probably use like a 16 to 20 week block. And then from there, based on blood work, chances are it probably is going to end up being 16, 20 weeks. I wouldn't normally push more than 20 weeks super physiological. They'll have a period of time where they run through like a cruise or a health focus phase, where we're looking at restoring the markers in their blood work that's been compromised from the last 3, 4, 5 months.
What I would say from a personal standpoint is, when you're running the stack like it is, you're seeing it on my blood work, Cal, your actual blood work doesn't come back nowhere near as skewed as it used to with running these compounds. So when people hear, oh, you're escalating these milligrams up over weeks, over 16 weeks, over so on, they automatically think you're on fucking 3 gram. Do you know what I mean? But you're not actually on 3 gram. You're on 300 meg a test, and then you push certain things like Primo and Proviron and things like that. I mean, so that's the difference, where people, like, when they hear, oh, you push this cycle for 16 weeks and it's going to go up and up and up, they're thinking you're adding fucking 250 milligram a test every single fucking month. Do you know what I mean? And it's not the case. And the thing that I've found is, like I say, my blood work's come back and it's been near enough pretty fucking decent to say we've been on cycle for 16, 20 weeks. And I think that helps. And then, if you touched on it before, but just moving on to like other pathways of growth, like the things that I've never done before, like the long-acting insulin, the short-acting insulin, they're other things that people don't really know about to be able to obviously push the growth and push muscle, like obviously ability to eat food. They just always think anabolics.
Yeah.
So
that like lower risk model, like if you want to read more about this, like 2 good people to learn from would be Victor Black and Joe Jeffrey. Joe's also done a lot of stuff on here. Victor's a really good guy too, and obviously Dean you've already had on, but like they've like talked about this in depth on their websites and stuff. But and this goes for like particularly important with females who are enhanced as well. We want to try and rinse any tool that will offer us benefits that's not an androgen. So like as soon as we get into the androgen side, as soon as we're using the tests, the primos, the trends, the nandrolones, whatever it might be, the higher those dosing requirements get, the more compromised there will be on our health. But we can also use different pathways that will still apply benefit in their own individual ways, but they're not going to have the compromise that something like testosterone or an androgen in general. So we've got like the metformins, we've got insulin, long, short, we've got the use of growth hormone, we've got the use of we've got the use of injectable L-carnitine, all these things that can offer us benefit that we can pretty much use year round as we need to, that aren't having a negative influence on your blood work. If anything, they're probably going to have a positive impact on your blood work, because the metformin and the insulin is lowering your HbA1c, and it's lowering the inflammation that we have when we're pushing food. You know, we're going to use maybe not like an ARB, like something like telmisartan that has a regulative impact on blood pressure and has cardiac protective benefits. So we're using tools that I might send you something where you see it and there's like 12 things on this piece of paper. And then you might see another cycle, which is, you know, 750 milligrams of testosterone and a gram of MPP. And it's like, oh, the 2 things is surely better than the 12 things, because this is 2 and this is 12. But if we're looking at the impact this has on your physiology, the cycle with the 2 compounds is actually much worse than this is. It's just this are spread across multiple pathways. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Would you consider Victor Black being like the extreme version, and you sit in the middle, kind of thinking about Mike Metzer in terms of volume? He's like a very extreme version of that, and you've kind of taken from that and adapted it a little bit.
Yeah,
you could think of yourself as the Roy D. Dorian Yates in this case.
yeah, I like
But his approach is super like extreme in that way. Another thing I wanted to point out was actually that I think is really important in terms of female PED use, is that I think that triggered a lot of people looking into the safer use for females to obviously not have androgenic side effects. And then now we're seeing it applied to males, you know, in a more extreme way. We're going to get less side effects in those sorts of way. But I think that it was a really positive thing, especially for females, because there was so much bullshit out there and people were really fucking themselves up. And the care that was given to females and the amount of information that's out there now is now seeing the benefits kind of absorbed into the male use of PEDs. I think it's all very positive, and certainly for females, having this information and seeking multiple pathways is by far like the most beneficial way in terms of side effects.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't really a question. I was just kind of agreeing. I think it's
Victor
good.
White. Go on, Victor White.
What was the other thing I wanted to ask about? The long-acting insulin as well, and also like the review of dangers of heart issues and metformin against being used, and various other drugs being used against that, specifically in terms of blood glucose levels and plaque buildup in arteries.
So you're referring to higher blood glucose levels having detriment long term?
Yeah.
So like the one thing that I'd use pretty much with everyone, as long as there is like I do see this a lot where it's like, oh, if you told someone to take a gram of test, they'd be like, sweet. If you told someone to take 20 IU of Lantus, they'd be like, well, I'm not using insulin, it's too dangerous. It's like we've got to then have like a bit of an informative chat there in terms of, you know, what's going on here. But you're absolutely right. Like the trends with blood glucose day to day, whether you're measuring that fasted or postprandial after food, or just if you're looking at blood work and you're looking at that HbA1c level, the higher the blood glucose for the longer the period of time, you know, we can go into some pretty nasty situations there when you're looking at enhanced bodybuilders, or, you know, bodybuilders that are using tools to optimize the physiological responses and trying to preserve their health. So like any individual who's trying to push lean tissue on and trying to grow over the long term, they're going to spend a certain amount of time across the year, and it's probably going to be the majority of the year in a caloric surplus or pushing food up. So we look at, you know, how long have you you bodybuilded?
10 years probably.
Yeah. So like, say the amount of time that you've been in a caloric surplus and you've been pounding food into your GI for that length of time, you know, we need to have a really close tab of what's going on from the response of blood glucose and how high blood glucose is for how long. So the popularity of the use of metformin now, and the popularity of the use and the probably the removal of the dogma behind insulin use as well, like the whole like big gut situation, or the whole insulin, you know, is too dangerous situation. As long as the individual knows what they're doing and uses that minimal approach and uses like, right, we're going to stimulate this and use a little bit and just kind of allow that to tick over in the background. You know, the LD50 of Lantus is like 700 IU or 800 IU or something ridiculous. Like you'd have to inject like 3 entire pens. So 2 and
I'm up for it.
Experiment. But like you're talking like if I use Lantus with Ryan, he'd be using like 20 IU with his first meal each day. But obviously that's then ticking over across the day, and it's allowing him to regulate his blood glucose through the period of time he's in his feeding window, so he's eating his meals. And then we might use a little bit of fast-acting insulin around the workout where he's got his bigger carbohydrate meals, but he's literally using enough to alleviate the pressure on his pancreas having to produce so much insulin because he's on 600, 700, 800 grams of carbs. Now, if he's going to eat 800 grams of carbs for 6 months out of the year, and he's not taking anything or using any protocols to improve his ability to manage blood glucose, this could be Ryan 6 months out of every single year for the next 10 years, spending 6 months of the year, half the year, with his blood glucose at 7 millimolar. Now, we're in a position where that's obviously a pretty bad sign of general well-being as well. So we're going to get issues with the heart, we're going to get issues with the level of inflammation in his body. And then it's a knock-on effect, because every year we have out of that decade, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And this is something like, you probably saw this with like, remember when Anabolic Designs released, was it Matador, their GDA that first came out? It's like, like when they started using like berberine and bitter melon and what else was there, like chromium and other things. When that first became popular, they were kind of going down that path then, but then obviously over the last probably couple of years, and Vic has probably been a leading figure in this in terms of the popularity of it, but like the use of metformin and the removal of the stigma behind the use of insulin as well. When we're doing things properly, like they can be fantastic tools. And realistically, especially for a bigger bodybuilder who's really pushing food, they probably should be tools that you should be considering, because they can be therapeutic in their own individual ways.
Yeah, I think people are just thinking, oh, I'm going to do insulin and then somehow I'll just be dead. Like,
Yeah.
I woke up dead. It was a nightmare. Can't believe it. I will not do that next week. We'll avoid the dying aspect. I mean, metformin was one of the things. There was a question that was sent to me because it's the new thing that initially it came out and stuff, and it was, it was said to reduce inflammation to a point where like protein synthesis was reduced, mTOR was turned off, and all of this sort of stuff in the initial studies for old people, basically. And then it turned out that these were actually like flawed. You can probably explain it, and as you're here, you may as well. Maybe you could explain to the viewers about the main use of metformin.
So I think that the study was relating to AMPK, wasn't it, or mTOR?
Yeah, mTOR.
They found an older demographic. It was having negative implications on their ability to retain lean mass or something, but. If you pull up the study, the people in the study were like 70 years old, and they were using, I think it was 1500 milligrams. So when I'm like dosing metformin, I probably use like 500 milligrams a day for most people. So especially for someone that's enhanced, like if you're using testosterone, if you're using an androgen, then you don't have to worry about that at all, because you're stimulating something far more powerful than the precursor they're talking about. But the study that they brought out when it was looking at metformin and muscle building and having compromise there, I think that was probably quite a unique situation with an elderly population. But metformin is another one where we're like, unlike taking direct insulin, metformin is basically an insulin sensitizer. So it's allowing a more insulin responsive environment that you're creating. So you're having, metformin is the number one tool for, and you'd use this in medicinal practice as well, for managing HbA1c for, say, for example, we've got a type 2 diabetic, and they're obviously having problems producing a sufficient level of insulin to meet their requirements. They'd use something like metformin to be an insulin sensitizer, so they're having a bigger bang for their buck effect for the insulin they are producing. So that's another tool that we can use. And it's, in the grand scheme, it's a small dose. It's very cheap as well. Another tool that we can, I just use year round with most people in that situation.
Great, thanks. The other thing that I was saying is that there has been some side effects picked up on it for gastric issues, pain, bloating, even in diabetics as well. And whether you think that's like dose dependent.
Yeah, I think that's going to be milligram per day dependent. I've never had anyone ever have an issue with 500 milligrams.
And would you split the dose personally?
I usually do it with the last meal of the day. 500 meg with the last meal of the day. I don't normally do it upon wake, just because if there is a if there is a GI response, and I'd rather do it while they're asleep than when they're awake and they're trying to eat the meals.
I'd rather shit the bed.
Yeah,
Than on the bus.
Just do it at
Don't
night.
want to shit on the. Yeah, shitting at work's fine. People expect it now.
But yeah,
I've totally hijacked the questions, but it's just a lot of things that I get asked as being considered an old school bodybuilder, and also who was it? Is it TX Muscle? What's the guy's name?
not Palumbo, is it? No.
Yeah, Palumbo, because he did a thing on metformin with quite a lot of negativity, like surrounding it. That was kind of looking into that study, and that kind of brought up the whole thing. And like you said, when you dug a bit deeper, that's where my initial kind of U-turn gets. But I get asked loads of questions because I'm considered old school. So 9 grams of tren and no bands. But people are always, because I feel like they're trying to catch me out. do you know what I mean? You're old, you don't know dick. That is true, obviously. Well, I know about dick.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah. Sorry, Johnny, I've hijacked it.
It's fine. It's fine. Most of the questions you were asking were actual questions that we had on there.
I did have a scan. It's just like the new way that like bodybuilding's going, and like you said, like the multiple pathway approach for longevity, like it is the way forward.
I'm just waiting to see how many of these things pop up on my diet next week, Dan.
Fuck all, mate. Fuck all, mate. You'll see. But what you need to do is be able to eat it and not shit yourself inside out because you ate like a cheese swirl over Christmas and now you can't eat anything.
Done. I regret it. Right, okay. So, some fucking retarded questions on there too. So, there's another one about reverse banding. Seems to be synonymous with you for some reason. I know Cal is an advocate for reverse banding, cuffs, etc., all the modern day methods. Does he suggest as a beginner nailing the basics first for a few years, i.e. sticking to free weight compounds and utilizing reverse bands and cuffs when you're a few years in, or using them from the start, if that makes sense? That's what the question says.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a misconception in terms of like what the basics are, because like if I've got a beginner, the goal and the what we should be trying to achieve is trying to deliver the most effective challenge. And for a beginner, you're probably going to use not a lot of volume to get there, because they need to learn how to train, they need to learn intensity, they need to learn how to take sets to failure, they need to learn how to find tension and keep tension in a set. They need to have that kind of psychological buffer of getting used to being uncomfortable within sets. And if I've got an effective way to get there, then I'm not going to not go there. I'm not going to make something less effective than I know it could be. So when you're looking at a resistance band, and I can definitely admit this stuff is definitely overused, because when Joe Bennett first came popular a couple of years ago, everyone would basically copy what he was doing, but they wouldn't really know why they were doing it. And that 100% is true. Like I fully agree with that.
They're also banding it like so that you could just lift more, right?
Yeah, you can just put like endless plates in there and just continue to do it. So if we know how to apply this stuff, and if I read through your program and you're like, right, I've got this reverse banded press and a reverse banded hack, as long as you know why it's there and you can explain that and it's logical, then I don't have an issue with that. But I think the overuse of it just to be seen doing it in the first place, to look more advanced, is the problem, because the individual that are doing that probably couldn't explain why it was there in the first place.
Well, you'd be looking for a cue for its use, wouldn't it? This is done so that it feels like, if it doesn't feel like that and doesn't do it, then maybe there's a conversation to be had around that. I still have a little problem with cuffs, because once I've performed my fly with cuffs, which I don't do because I have hands, they're mad. God gave them to me. And once I've performed this and I've failed, I'm stuck there, potentially forever. Especially if it was lockdown, I was training in the container. I might have to stay there, I hate the idea of being strapped in and then having to remove myself from this torture contraption, unless it's bedroom related.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I think
you're tied to a fucking bed.
I think, like, to answer that question, like, I would just view the way I view training is like training I'm training muscles, and there are different ranges I'm trying to load that muscle in. And you could train the pec with, there are certain points of value and there are certain compromises to every single exercise. As long as it's performed correctly and we have an awareness of how a lift should be done, how it should be executed, where we're placing tension, there's no right or wrong movement. It's just relative to the individual. So saying a beginner needs to start with the squat, bench, deadlift, or a beginner needs to start with a barbell press, whatever it might be, it's flawed, because a barbell press is going to be the same as a Smith machine. You're just placing tension on the pec. So it's relative to their requirements. If I got a client who absolutely loves to incline barbell press, or if they have the capacity to do it, I'm going to let them do it because they enjoy doing it. Whereas if I've got someone who has a lot of shoulder instability, or they can't execute a barbell press because they can't pat the scap down, or they can't brace.
What if they press 4 plates, it looks terrible, and then they jump onto 5 plates on the incline?
We're not talking about anyone specific.
Yeah.
Do you think? I mean, I would say that there is value to using free weights for stabilization reasons if you can. But I'd say that if you can grow from the basics, that's wicked. I've been an incredibly strong squatter in my time, and my legs are shit. So it would make every reason to not do it, even though for some reason I was just absolutely religiously, I must squat because there was a thing, you must squat. And then I can talk about what I squat to other people who also squat through no gain to themselves. I think we did have Joe Bennett on, and he came up with something very interesting. And you said about what is the basics. People now think of like the hack squat is like a basic, yeah. And so the design of the hack squat, which is potentially quite complex, it takes almost the addition of a band really doesn't add that much of a design. Like, it's not that much of a move from making a machine that, it's not a natural movement that you would do in real life, hunting for wildebeest or collecting berries, like we're all supposed to imagine that we do when we only squat, bench and deadlift, the staple moves that you would do if you would. No one would be wasting time doing that. You've got to catch the
the liver guy, the liver king.
Oh
yeah, I just came across the liver cunt recently.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
He makes his wife sleep on like a wooden panel, doesn't he? And his kids are there, they're going, I got an ounce of ground beef, and their kids are like,
yeah, we've got liver stew and we've got a protein shake full of beet.
Oh mate, it's
he doesn't use bands. He definitely doesn't use bands.
I'm just going to carry this rock across the ground and then put it down, because that's what men do.
I'd love to see what his manly stack looks like.
His what?
His manly stack, like what's he jabbing, or do you think it is literally just milks, balls?
Yeah,
I reckon he's on TRT test and a good amount of GH a day, good quality GH a day
that he gets from a monkey's pituitary gland.
Yeah.
That's the only real way to do it when you're the liver king.
Yeah, he's fucking got 1 million followers. I love him.
Has he already?
What a guy.
What a guy.
Have we got any more questions?
Yeah,
I was going to ask a quick question as well. Just obviously regarding your
Are you still here? What?
What's this?
Oh, hello.
I thought you just did the intro.
I'm still suffering from legs. Like, I'm learning a lot, man.
It's like a ring girl. You just comes in.
Danny,
just your,
you still upset about that rep that he missed?
Oh mate, I'm fuming about it. Like when you sent me the video, it brought it all back.
I
did forget how much of a cunt I was to him on the leg extension. I was like, you fucking dare get up, you can't, like, pushing him back in the fucking thing.
Someone did message me and they said, was Dan generally not happy with him training? Like, and I was like, no, it was nothing like that. It was just literally the push, like, so don't worry about it.
You need counselling, guys.
Yeah. I think my soul's still here.
I asked the videographer to edit it out, but there is a band on the pendulum. Don't tell anyone, apart from obviously everyone watching.
So go on your question, bud.
Yeah, question, but just on the fact of, like, obviously your clients have started out with you. Has there been any sort of clients that start with like a really bad, they've been on a real bad cycle, and have you done what's your sort of approach to, like, reverse that and clean out basically any sort of bad side effects they've got and stuff like that,
Yeah. So like obviously if they've been on like something that was like perceived to be really aggressive. So say somebody came in, they were using like a loaded test, a load of nandrolone, a load of orals, whatever it might be. Ryan.
Sorry.
We're actually you weren't actually that bad, to be fair.
Why?
Well, hi, fam.
We run some blood work, so you basically get like a blueprint of what was off, and then you're gonna have an appreciation of what needs to be corrected. Realistically, the only way we can correct that in the most time efficient way is to just pull them into a physiological cruise. Like when you like use the blanket statement of cruise, then we need to actually make sure that we correlate that with blood work being in a physiological range. To say we brought them back down to say 25, 30 nanomolar. So for most people, it'll be like 125, maybe 150 milligrams of test. Only then can we be in a position where those markers that are off can be addressed when they're physiological. Because if we're still super physiological above that 30, 40 nanomolar range, it's going to take a long time, and some of that stuff might not pull back into range. So say it came back and they had like high LDL, low HDL, liver enzymes were skewed, their GFR was super low, regardless of creatinine, it was just low because kidney function was struggling. We might run a cystatin C-score as well. Say their red blood cells were super high, so we could bloodlet, but then we need to have time with them in a physiological range to correct that. The first point of call is just pulling everything down to the lowest effective dose. Just like we would be training, if somebody came in there super fatigued, I'd pull the volume down. Well, the same thing with the stack. You just pull the milligram per week down to the lowest effective dose they could maintain their lean tissue on. And then you can, we could look at like adding in organ support, and we could look at adding in, the citrus bergamons, the krill oil, the EPA, DHA, whatever it might be. If we were doing those things and adding in the CV stack or whatever, whatever health support it would be in terms of off the counter, it's like putting a band-aid on an open wound if they're still running the gear high. So we need to pull them down to a TRT type dose, an actual physiological dose for them to correct that. And then you're basically like reverse engineering it. So like I've had loads of clients where, and it was the same as what Andy said there, where it was like, you've got someone who was almost using gear to a point where it was becoming negative because their body was almost like ill responsive of the amount they were doing. And then they suddenly pull all this down and they work slowly back up and they start responding again. And that would be the ultimate goal, is getting away with the lowest we can take and then gradually building back up to a point where we're progressing again at the rate we want.
Can I just flip that to a female perspective in terms of hormones and cycles in regard to their menstrual cycle?
Yeah.
No, I wanted to ask you to do that for me.
So what do you
so
mean?
Say you have a new client come to you and their hormone basis is off, which is probably like the more likely worrying thing to be happening to females. Obviously you're going to go and try and like create those physiological you're going to get them in that range and stuff like that. Obviously, depending on women having polycystic ovaries and stuff, may have heightened testosterone and then other things skewed off as well. With the now, it's quite popular for TRT for females, and where you might try and pitch that, say someone comes off a prep, like a female's hormones are going to be completely fucked. Probably more so than a man. Their menstrual cycle's likely stopped. If you're using TRT, do you have a break period before you analyze that after a show prep? Or if someone's come to you and they're using high androgens and you want to are you going to see where they are and then try and bring TRT in to match a physiological state or the higher end? Or
so like if I was using enhancement with a female and they're already enhanced, whether they came to me enhanced, whether we were starting, they'd have like what we refer to as like a basal stack, so like a stack they could use year round that would probably involve HRT, so like testosterone at say 2 to 3 milligrams a week, which is probably putting them around 1.7, maybe 2 nanomolar. And that would be our kind of like HRT for them, because we use
the high end is like 1.6, something like that.
1.7 on the blood work.
Yeah.
So if we had like polycystic demographic, that might be going to like the mid 2s, maybe even 3. For a regular cyclical female, you probably look at around the high 1s being the end range. That would be the stack, because we're using testosterone, and that would then equate to having a sufficient level of circulating estradiol as well, estrogen. that would be the stack we could use year round. And then my goal would be, if they were in a contest prep or if they were in an off season, I would then use really short bouts of dose exposure above that physiological range.
Okay.
Then after they pulled that physiological exposure out, and realistically for a female, when we want to try and avoid viralization and negative consequences, it needs to be the shortest space of time possible. After you pull that out, they're just going to go back to their baseline HRT and just stay there, because what we don't want is that massive peak and trough of like you've just said, right? They've just smashed a load of gear at the back end of prep, and now they're going to have 3 or 4 months where their hormones are virtually non-existent, because it's going to take the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the ovaries time for the hormones to be produced again. So you're better off for that situation where they know they're going to use it again in a certain period of time. You're better off just going back to that HRT dose and just stabilizing again.
Or even looking at blood work of natural athletes, females, when they come in, their testosterone seem to take a real big hit. Have you ever used DHEA directly for someone who doesn't want to go down the assisted route?
Yeah, like there's who produces it? I think that might be BioVia that have the DHA that I've used before, but that's another tool that you can use for stability there for sure. And you typically, for those low hormone states for females, you see a massive response in like their mood and well-being once that goes back in.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Sorry, I'm using this for my own personal. Like, hey, I've tried this. This is what I found. It's kind of like.
What obviously for some people,
I need to just get a conference call with Calum, really, and shoot the shit.
Using tren in an off-season setting is like obviously unheard of, or people just don't like doing it.
Fuck that! I love that shit.
Yeah, we know you do,
but I don't do it.
Dude, gives you an excuse to beat people up.
It is definitely his excuse. Stands up in court.
Yeah,
That's like a real thing.
He put Garrett through legs and he's actually killed him. What's your thoughts on using tren in the off season then?
So like trenbolone's another one where it's like the risk and the danger is in the dose. So the milligram per week is going to dictate the impact it has on your physiology and your blood work. Now there are a lot of arguments for trenbolone being a relatively effective drug to use year round because it's more tissue selective. So when you're looking at the use of nandrolone, or say, for example, we've got that 19-nor pathway, we've got tren and we've got nandrolone. The use of MPP or DECA is probably going to equate to a higher level of neurotoxicity, and especially when the milligram per week goes up, a high level of degradation of blood work, because people that generally use nandrolone, they're probably going to use it in maybe the 300s, the 400s, however much it might be. The trenbolone argument year round is going to be on the basis of using a very small amount, just to basically have that 19-nor pathway stimulated. So if we're using trenbolone in an off-season environment, I might be using a little bit of test. To say for Ryan, it might be like 300 milligrams of test.
Lying. It's not really 500, 600, easy.
800. The primo is going to escalate as the main anchor, and then we might use say 100 milligrams of tren. Now tren at 100 milligrams, because it's obviously fairly highly tissue selective, it's not a lot in terms of the milligram per week load. It is androgenic, of course, but we're also getting benefits on there having an impact on that glucocorticoid receptor. So we're making the stack as a whole slightly more effective because the tren's there. But the dangers in the dose, like I wouldn't use tren at 300, 400, 500 milligrams, well, at all really, but you definitely wouldn't use that in the off season.
No, I said that to you when prep, didn't I? I texted you when I started prep and said I can't use any more than 300 milligrams of tren because it doesn't end well for me or anyone else. So, but then we didn't use over 150 mg, did we?
We went 150, yeah.
Yeah, 150 mg.
Yeah, because it's interesting because tren has the stigma as well for like neural toxicity and stuff like that, and things like that. And you're right, it takes out the variable that it is dose dependent. Like it's not one thing or the other if you don't then consider like what you're doing when you actually put it against another compound of the same use. You know, and people were driving the nandrolones hard as fuck, like especially, you know, back in the day. The DECA face was big in the game.
Yeah, 100%. It's the applicability there is the milligram per week, and you know you could use things effectively in a lower risk manner, but then you could also completely blow past that just by using too much of something each week. So
I did hear of a certain well-known subscription site of a cycle shared of 1.8 grams of trampoline.
I saw 1,300. I didn't see 1,800.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was 1,300, and when I asked, it was actually, so I logged it in my brain as that.
Yeah.
Like, how the fuck? Like, like I don't know how it would just. I would be ill.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't. Do you think it's possible that someone actually just isn't absorbing it? I mean, let's remove the possibility that it's been made in a bathtub and a microwave in someone's like back garden. And do you reckon it's possible that someone could have the physiology to reject that sort of thing?
I think there's definitely going to be a point of diminishing return in terms of what's actually going to have a positive impact relative to something that's probably going to turn into a negative in terms of response. And when there's that much burden and stress on your physiology, and the chances are, if you're on 1,300 milligrams of tren, you're probably not going to be sleeping all that much as well at the back end of prep. It's another contributing factor to what's going on there. Like, you're probably going to find to a point where things are just going to start to take a U-turn.
Do you think some people are like will respond to like the toxicity of that differently? Like the idea of being able to actually even cope with that at all, to me, seems completely insane.
Yeah.
Like that could someone actually be, could it help someone? I don't know, it baffles the shit out of me, because
that's where like the individuality of responding to androgens in the first place has precedent. Like, one story I always tell in the situation, and he won't mind me saying, but like when I was at M10 and Josh was there, I think it was the year before he won the Pro Universe. I can't remember what year that was, but
2018.
2018. He'd rarely run blood work prior to that, and obviously I think it was before his prep. And Josh is a big boy, right? So like this is a super heavyweight bodybuilder at the top of his game. He ran blood work prior to starting his universe prep, and I was like, send them to me, and I was adamant they were going to be awful, and everything came back absolutely fine. And that was like I don't know how, it must have been nearly a decade into his bodybuilding journey. But you do that again for the next man, and his blood work will be through the gutters poor. So like that's where the individuality of this sport comes into play. Like, you'll see a lot of pros that are using ridiculous amounts of gear that can, seemingly handle what they're doing, but you are going to have the outliers in terms of response here, and you're going to get the next man take that you're only going to have a certain amount of time where it's a ticking time bomb of how long you can last.
Yeah, and that's another genetic thing that's why they're able to do what they're able to do, right?
Yep.
I don't think it's needed though, to realistically.
No.
Not a gram, 1.3 gram of fucking.
No.
Oh no, I don't think we've done a U-turn on that.
Yeah.
I think the irony in that situation is for the majority of the time, especially when you're looking at the top pros as well, if they've done it and found success with it, they're probably not going to change the way they act in that situation. So it's quite hard to kind of reverse engineer that as to like, well, what, if you took maybe 300 milligrams of Chen, you might still be able to be as good with. If they've taken 6 or 8 and they've come top 10 of the Olympia, then the chances are, when the stakes are that high, they're probably not going to take less. They're probably only going to take more in that situation.
Yeah, they don't want to risk a year potentially.
They don't want to risk any compromise.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, my mind is like exploding.
Okay, it's a little bit heavier than the normal podcast.
It's a little bit heavier than our Christmas special where we chatted absolute shit on my sofa. Like, that's definitely. Yeah. Well, we like to have, mix it up. Some we chat more shit than others, and some where there's more things to be said. It's better to just let it go there, and that's your thing, and I think that's what people will watch this for.
Yeah, it's just informative, isn't it? I think it's a different approach, which is quite, even for myself, like Dan's been bodybuilding 10 years, I have, and even when I looked at it on paper, I was like, the fuck is all this stuff? I didn't even know what metformin was. So I was like, it's bollocks. But then once you actually utilize it and use it, you can tell the difference massively.
The cool thing for me, Ryan, is the fact that now, say for example, I've now kind of showed you the value of that, then you're going to go and take that and you're going to say like, right, this is valuable. You know, my guys or girls should be doing this as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it kind of feeds down in the industry. And what we said before in terms of like that value added is the fact that if the guys that are coaching other guys start doing this, then the guys that are coaching these guys start doing it. And then we're starting to build a better, more informed industry when it comes to enhancement and the use of gear in general, which is making everything better because people are informed about how to lower risk.
Yeah, especially like I think we did about 200 master run maybe. It might have been 150 master run, 150 trend, even all length and eights, 300 test, and I've never done a prep on that lower dosage. Like you're like not a chance. But when you've actually been through it and done it and seen how you felt off it and seen the results at the end of it, now, like you say, I can then pass that on to people and actually say it works. Like obviously there's going to be outliers where you're going to have to push it a little bit more. But yeah, like that lower dose approach definitely works.
Well, just also the flip of the mind of something that a lot of people with the extreme of we're bodybuilders, we're extreme and stuff like that. The goal should always be the absolute minimum for the greatest gain. Mm-hmm. And even though I'm like old school and stuff like that, that's always been my insight. There's always something that Anth has as an insight and thing like that. You should use the absolute minimum and find where that is. Because rarely I've found the answer is more. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, tried some shit out. Sorry, my dog just tried to attack the other dog for some reason. Just kick him in the face. Then kick yourself in the face for being mean to the dog. But yeah, I think that's the switch. Do the gym stuff extreme, do the drug stuff minimum as possible. I've heard some fucking crazy shit.
I need you to tell us about Ellis's escapade with spraying into the plug sockets.
Oh my god! Well, you've kind of ruined the punchline, if I'm completely honest.
I've already saw the Instagram story. I know what happened.
Yeah, my god. Yeah, she needs a minder. I might quit my job just so I can check that she's okay in day to day. Luckily, she's brain dead. Otherwise, it might have hurt her. But what is dead cannot die.
You know, electrician, mate.
Oh mate, it's fucked. It's fucked. The whole house is on fire. You know when he came round, it's gone.
It's gone.
The only thing that's left is the broom cupboard. Who's old enough to know Andy Peters? That's what I want to know. No one.
No.
Fucking hell. Wow, I'm gonna shut up now.
Cal, what's your thoughts? I know obviously you as a coach sometimes you will send people macros and then you'll have and then obviously I just like having a diet plan because it's easier to follow. What's your thoughts on the whole bro foods and eating Cocoa Pops and eating Pop-Tarts? Because I know what our diet breaks down to. But what's your thoughts on obviously people having this idea of like, obviously carbohydrates are carbohydrate and obviously we need to eat chicken and rice. What's your thoughts on that as a coach?
Like it's the same as like, same as a training thing. Like you've got a model that you're going to progress from. That could be multiple things to get to the end of the destination. Same thing with nutrition, energy balance, calories. There are certain requirements that we need to hit in terms of like micronutrient density and nutrients in general, but you can get them from supplements as well. What's going to be preference and what that client is going to find the easiest to do and what they're going to adhere to at the end of the day. So if that means that they need to track macros and be a little bit more flexible, then they track macros and be a little bit more flexible. If that means they want to be regimented and eat the bro foods that makes them feel good, then they can do that. Like I'll coach people in very different ways nutritionally based on what their preferences are. And if we ever get to a point in prep where it's like, right, the whole macro tracking thing's not working now because it's causing stress from them thinking about what they can eat and trying to fit shit in that's potentially not giving them the best response in terms of how they're recovering and performing, then I'll change it. But for the most part, it's very individual in terms of what they want to do and what they're going to prefer.
I mean, that's the main aspect, isn't it? That's the hierarchy. Yeah, it has to be something you can do.
Adherence,
that's like has to be the number one. Like, I guess when you're setting someone up, you send them a version before you lock it into Nazi Germany. And yeah, I know some people, obviously, it's like, if you do it, you do it. If you're not, then you're shit because you haven't done things and stuff like that. And you know, people have like lives and need to go to work and shit. You know, it does need to be doable.
Yeah, I've found that in the past where I've had the sort of coaches where they've said to me, "Oh, this is your plan," and they literally just add oats on top of oats on top of oats on top of rice, and it's like Carl tell you, sometimes my carbs will be at 1,000 gram, and I'm like, I can't eat fucking 900 to 1,000 gram of carbs in oats and rice.
You pussy.
Yeah, exactly, and I just don't want it bad enough.
That would be their exact response as well.
Yeah, like you just don't want it bad enough.
I still remember Marcus were all like holding up like 2 kilo bags of rice. I eat this a day. I was like,
a small child.
oh my
A
God.
small child in it.
Yeah, whilst smoking as well. That was what I thought was really great about that video.
Amazing. Yeah.
So we do 5 top tips.
Yeah.
So at this point, I think I did warn you about this. We look for 5 top tips. I think I got that. You know, like the phone's for you. I was testing that. It's not ready. Yeah, I need to practice. But we ask everyone to give us 5 top tips. Doesn't have to be bodybuilding related. Doesn't have to make any sense. You know, have fun with it.
Go fucking wild. Go crazy.
It can be dog related. I want to know a bit about your dogs. To be fair, maybe.
Honestly, his dogs are the greatest. It's got his dogs have massive balls. They're like.
I'll show you his balls.
Yeah, show us his balls. I'll come and get Abe's balls. Abe, come here.
In comparison to the size of the dog, these.
Oh Jesus, he's a tiny dog.
Like sausage dog, eh?
Oh mate.
XG all day long.
Alex, get Abe over here. I've got to fucking. I'm not letting him out. He can outdo me in the brain stuff. He's not outdoing me on the dog testicle stuff. This is bullshit. Right.
Dogs like there's just so many people here.
Oh, it's class. It's so funny.
Sorry, Coops. We're having a ball off here.
Yeah,
Dan's getting his out. These dogs.
God,
There we go.
oh Jesus, I've wrecked the whole room. Oh God, he's gone in shit. Oh Jesus. Okay. All right. Sorry, Abe. You can leave now.
Fuck you, man.
All right. Sorry. We'll just have to go for some mini ones. They're pretty decent. Look at those.
Hey, one's gone.
I win. I fucking win. Not in my actual ball bag because that's not a thing.
Not anymore.
Funny, you probably couldn't see it. So much.
Oh no! Oh, he's completely ruined the whole room. Yeah, picking up my 50-kilo puppy was a shit idea.
Right, Ryder, why don't you talk me about your situation at home with the dog situation, how you're grooming the child into being a dog?
I'm not. This is private confidentiality, client confidentiality.
Have you got a clicker for the dog on that?
No, it's from my missus.
You're doing.
I sent a video of my missus in a lead to Cal, saying I don't need a dog. She's got bigger balls. My missus got bigger balls than your dog. That's what I put.
She's got bigger balls than me.
Obviously.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 5 top tips. Now we've had the ball
tips.
off,
Right.
and I'm the champion of the balls. I just want that in there. I need to win at something.
5 top tips. Tip number 1, you don't need a business mentor to be a good coach. Tip number 2, you should at all times try and progress on the smallest amount of gear that you need to make the progress you need to make. That's my health conscious tip for the day. Tip number 3, there is no right or wrong way to train as long as it fits the criteria for enjoyment and it has some modality in there that you can progress. And the reason why I say that is because, and this is I think it's a good way to think about it. If you pulled the top 10 at the Olympia off the stage in open bodybuilding and looked at how every single one of those individuals trained, they'd all say a different thing. They'll all have a different split. They'll all do different exercises. They'll all do different rep ranges. So they're like, it's obvious that we can do this in multiple ways. There's not one size fits all, but it's got to fit the criteria that we spoke about.
Just needs to be hard.
Needs to be hardcore. Tip number four, don't grow a mustache if you want your missus to like you.
And then keep it for like 3 extra months. flagged it from November and was like, yeah.
You won't go near me now.
I wonder if I can tip the balance. Maybe if I add the mustache, then she'll not go near me so much that she'll tip the thread and then back near me. You could do like a. It's worth a shot, right?
Worth a shot.
I mean, you know, the shape that my pubes in at the moment. Well, you know, I've tried everything else.
Fifth tip.
Tell us something you hate. Let's get a wooden spoon out.
Something I hate. I hate the really cringe influencer TikTok videos that you see online.
Oh yes.
That's something that make.
Give us an example.
Ooh,
Come on, shoot someone, Calum. He knows it. It's in his head. Can we mind read him? Can we read him? Is he going to do it?
Or what about Photoshop?
Comment below. Comment below if you think you can guess which one it is.
In the comments.
What are you going to say, Ryan?
What about photoshopping your stage shots?
Yeah, don't do that either. Oh.
Real awkward.
The thing about stage shots is that you can find them elsewhere. That's what.
Check-in photos or stage shots, and especially now, like, don't hide behind. You know, like the black cutouts that people get. Don't hide behind that as well, because
The what?
you know the black cutouts that people get, and then they'll like walk the photo.
So they're check-ins.
Do people actually do that? That's a thing. They actually change their check-in.
I'm sure we know something about that.
Because you will have to get on stage at the end of your prep, and you won't look like the photo, which is
You will have to lie. You will have to lie.
Although over lockdown there was a thing where you could enter a photo to win a bodybuilding competition.
True, yeah, true.
That was it. So do Photoshop them then. But other than that, I think we've got 5 top tips. I, for one, are going to need to sit in Abe's crate for about 3 hours and process what's happened today. Just like that time Uncle Jimmy came round. Could you maybe stop that?
Which one was more enjoyable then?
Huh?
Which one was more enjoyable though? How
Well, yeah.
violated did you feel on both? Scale of 1 to 10.
Well, you know, it's. I'm glad they didn't happen at the same time.
Yeah,
That would have been too much.
a little bit.
Are you going to outro us, Johnny?
Yeah, well, that'll fucking do, brother. We don't need it. Nobody watches this far, so we're all right.
That's not true. People are going to watch this far. We've even gone over our quota because it was just such a bombardment of information.
Exactly.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming on, Calum. It was great to meet you after some banters over Instagram of late.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate.
I'm still not going to check in this week.
This was your check-in, mate.
Yeah, because New Year's still ripped me off.
Yeah.
Yeah, trust me, mine was worse.
Yeah, yours was definitely worse.
Yeah.
Your check-in was the worst so
Why?
far.
What happened? Tell us.
He literally shut himself inside out and lost 6 kilos.
Oh.
That's not an exaggeration at all. That's actually what happened.
Dan said to me, I normally start with a push-up, but I think we've got that covered. And then in a week, I undid it all.
Yeah, I was like, wow, that escalated quickly. The McNabb effect. You just sign up, instantly drop 6 kilos. Oh, there's some marketing to be had there. I'll think about that later. See it on my grid.
Drop 6 kilos or your soul.
and your arse ring.
Yeah.
On that bombshell. Thank you, Calum. Appreciate it, bud.
Thank you, mate.
Pleasure.
Big love, mate.